If you're running a serious outreach operation right now, thousands of touches a month, a CRM that looks like a war room, follow-up sequences firing like clockwork, this video is for you. Because there's a specific thing happening inside that pipeline that most sponsors won't admit out loud. When you actually sit down and look at what's in there, it's distressed dogs, broker-shopped garbage that 3 other firms already passed on, and a handful of business owners who replied because they were bored, not because they were ready to sell. LMM transaction volume dropped from 501 deals in 2021 all the way down to 294 in 2023. It bounced back to 379 in 2024, and people called it a recovery. Then 2025 came in running 27% behind that pace. The market isn't recovering, it's contracting around the assets worth owning, and the buyers getting those assets aren't the ones with the biggest outreach lists. Most sponsors have convinced themselves that proprietary means no banker, no intermediary, no process, no auction, just direct outreach to the owner. And that sounds right. But what it looks like in practice is a mass email blast to 4,000 businesses fired off by a tool that autofills the owner's first name and the company's industry vertical. The founders doing $3 to $8 million EBITDA with clean books and a real succession timeline, the exact targets you actually want, those owners are going to a shrinking circle of buyers. And the reason has nothing to do with your subject line, your CRM, or how many touches you're running per quarter. The market is thinner than your pipeline suggests. Start with the structural reality, because most people are operating on a mental model of the LMM that's about 4 years out of date. The 379 transactions that closed in 2024 were a real bounce off the 2023 floor. But 2025 came in 27% behind that pace through the first 3 quarters, with tariff uncertainty freezing deal activity early in the year. So the recovery people were excited about has already started softening, and 2026 is opening into a market that's structurally thinner than almost any sourcing model was built for. Now layer in where capital actually went. Billion-dollar deals represented roughly 1/3 of all acquisitions in 2025, compared to 25% back in 2021. Capital migrated upmarket. The firms that can write larger checks move toward larger assets. And yes, that does leave white space in the LMM. But that white space is being contested by fewer buyers who are sharper, better networked, and increasingly running buy and build programs instead of standalone platform searches. That last part is the one most people aren't accounting for. Across PE broadly, add-ons ran between 73% and 80% of all buyout activity from 2021 through 2025. In the LMM specifically, roll-ups accounted for more than 80% of deals in 2024. So the majority of genuine deal flow in the sub $100 million enterprise value band isn't hitting the open market at all. It's getting absorbed by existing platforms doing bolt-on acquisitions, often through relationships that were built years before any outreach happened. Think about what that actually means for your pipeline. If 80% of the real activity is happening inside buy and build programs, the deals left over, the ones your automated sequences are actually reaching, are disproportionately the situations those programs already passed on. The owner who couldn't get to a number with 3 strategic buyers, the business with a customer concentration problem that makes add-on buyers nervous. The company where finding the real EBITDA requires a lot of creative math. Your pipeline looks active because you're measuring send volume and response rate, but the market contracted around the highest quality assets 2 years ago, and nobody updated the playbook. The macro isn't your fault. What you do with it is, so the market is thinner. That's the structural reality. But here's where it gets worse. What most sponsors are doing to respond to that thinness is exactly the wrong move. The cold email trap. Let me tell you what proprietary actually looks like in practice right now, because the word has been so thoroughly redefined by the industry that it barely means anything anymore. The original idea was sound. Get to the owner before a banker does. Build a relationship. Be in the room when the decision gets made. That's real proprietary access, and it's genuinely worth fighting for. What happened instead is that the execution of that idea collapsed into something completely different. A mass email blast to 4,000 hours VAC or specialty distribution businesses, filtered by revenue range, fired off through a sequencing tool that auto-populates the owner's first name and maybe a line about their city. And then the follow-up fires 3 days later, whether or not they responded. And then a third email on day 9 that says reaching out one last time. Here's what I want you to actually think about. Not the mechanics of the sequence, but what's happening on the other end of it. A founder built a specialty industrial services business over 27 years. He's 61. His kids aren't interested in running it. He's been quietly thinking about his options for 18 months, hasn't talked to a banker, hasn't told his management team anything. By every measure, this is exactly the owner you want first access to. He opens your email on a Tuesday morning. Subject line says something like partnership opportunity for. The body tells him your firm focuses on founder-led businesses in his sector and would love to learn more about his growth story. There's a Calendly link at the bottom. He closes it without responding. 3 days later, the follow-up arrives. Day 9, the third email. He marks it as spam. And here's the part that actually matters. He didn't just ignore your outreach. He made a judgment about your firm. You're now in the same mental category as the 39 other firms that contacted him this quarter with the same approach, the same language, the same Calendly link. Not a potential partner. Noise. The industry built a collective delusion around this. Proprietary got redefined to mean no banker, and then the execution of no banker became high-volume direct outreach. 2,000 emails a month, a 0.3% response rate, 6 meetings booked, 2 NDAs signed, 1 LOI that goes nowhere. The activity looks like sourcing. The output is not even the real problem. The real problem is what a 0.3% response rate tells you about the 99.7% who didn't respond. Those aren't neutral non-replies sitting quietly in someone's deleted folder. Some of those are the exact owners you most need to know, and they've now formed an opinion about your firm based on a sequence you probably didn't write yourself. Your outreach volume isn't building pipeline, it's building a reputation, just not the one you want. Every low-quality touch you send into a subsector is poisoning the ground for the genuine relationship you want to build 6 months from now. The founder you sequence today is the one whose accountant you'll meet at an industry conference next year, and that accountant will mention your firm, and the founder will remember exactly how you showed up the first time. The highest quality targets, the ones with clean financials, and an owner who has actual choices about who buys his business, those owners have been contacted so many times they've built a cognitive filter. Automated outreach lands in one bucket automatically. You didn't lose that deal in the data room. You lost it the moment your sequence fired. The sourcing logic is broken at the root. Now you might be thinking the fix is better targeting. Warmer copy, a more specific subject line, maybe a different sequencing tool, and those things matter at the margin. But the actual problem isn't the execution. It's the mental model underneath the execution. Because most sponsors are running a sales funnel and calling it deal sourcing. And those are two fundamentally different things with two completely different operating logics. In a sales funnel, the levers are volume and conversion rate. You put enough leads in the top, optimize the stages, and some percentage falls out the bottom as closed business. That math works fine when you're selling software or insurance or anything where the buyer evaluates on features and price and doesn't care about your reputation before the first conversation. Push enough volume through and the numbers work eventually. Deal sourcing doesn't operate that way. The lever isn't conversion rate. It's what I'd call trust density, which is just a precise way of asking how many people in your target market would call you first before they call anyone else, before they talk to a banker, before they even tell their CFO they're thinking about it. That number is the real measure of your sourcing capability. Not send volume, not open rate, not meetings booked per quarter. And here's the structural problem. The funnel model doesn't just fail to build trust density, it actively destroys it. Every automated touch you send is a signal, and the signal it sends is specific. I don't know you individually, I'm not willing to invest time before asking for something, and you are one of many. That signal doesn't land as neutral, it lands as a reason to classify your firm and move on. Most sponsors built their current outreach infrastructure during 2020 and 2021, when deal volume was high enough that even mediocre sourcing produced results. You could send a generic sequence to a filtered list and occasionally find an owner who happened to be ready at that exact moment, happened to respond, and happened to move forward. It worked often enough that people concluded the approach was sound. The approach wasn't sound, the environment was just forgiving enough to paper over the cracks. That environment is gone. The playbook stayed, Think about it from the signal to noise angle, because this is what shifted most dramatically in the last 4 years. In 2021, a founder getting 10 outreach emails a month from PE firms felt like attention. His business was generating interest. In 2026, a founder getting 10 a week from indistinguishable firms running identical sequences doesn't feel like attention. It feels like spam, because that's what it is. The signal that used to mean your business matters now means you're on a list somewhere. The firms actually winning on sourcing right now aren't sending more. They're sending to 200 targets instead of 2,000. But they know those 200 cold. They've tracked them for months. When they reach out, there's a clear and specific reason why this business right now fits what they're building. That's a different communication entirely. And it reads differently because it is different. What that actually looks like in practice: you identify a subsector, say specialty distribution in the Southeast, you map the ownership landscape, you find 3 owners approaching retirement age, 2 of whom already turned down a banker in the last 18 months, and you build a 6-month relationship cadence around that intelligence before you ever send anything that looks like an outreach email. You show up at their industry association. You get introduced through their accountant. By the time you ask for a conversation, you're not a stranger with a Calendly link. You're someone who already understands their world. Volume is how you look busy. Trust density is how you actually close. What real proprietary access looks like. So let's redefine the term from scratch, because proprietary has been stretched so far that it's almost useless now. Proprietary isn't about channel. It's not about whether a banker is involved or whether you found the company through a database or a referral. Plenty of deals that run through bankers were proprietary at an earlier stage, and plenty of direct deals are just auctions with fewer bidders. Real proprietary access is about timing and position. You're in the room before the owner has decided to sell, which means you're not competing on price, you're shaping how the owner thinks about the transaction entirely. That's a categorically different kind of advantage. 3 conditions have to be true for that to happen. The owner already knows who you are before you reach out. You have a thesis that maps to their specific situation, not just their sector or revenue band. And you've shown through some prior signal that you can actually close a transaction without turning it into a 9-month ordeal that hollows out their management team and produces nothing. Those 3 things together are what generate a first call, not a better subject line. The difference between cold and warm outreach isn't tone. It's whether the message could have been sent to anyone on a filtered list, or whether it could only have been sent to this person at this time because of something specific you already know about their situation. Cold sequences produce replies from owners who are curious, bored, or already in market talking to 4 other firms. Warm approaches produce replies from owners who haven't made a decision yet, which is exactly where you want to be, because that's where you can actually shape the outcome. Getting to warm requires prior signal, and that signal almost never comes from your CRM. It comes from showing up at the industry association, where your target sits on the board. It comes from a referral through their CPA, who already knows your firm closes cleanly and doesn't nickel and dime on rep and warranty coverage in the final stretch. It might be a comment you left on a trade publication piece where the owner talked about his expansion into a new geography. None of those things look like sourcing activity in a weekly pipeline report. All of them are doing more real sourcing work than 500 automated emails, because they're building context before you ask for anything. Specificity in the initial message does the same thing. A note that references their actual customer concentration, a piece of equipment they recently financed, or a key hire they made 8 months ago tells the owner you've spent real time on their business before approaching them. Time spent before the ask is a form of respect, and founders who've built something genuinely worth buying are acutely sensitive to whether the person approaching them has done any work, or is just running a sequence. The research doesn't have to be exhaustive. It has to be visible enough that the owner knows it happened. Buy and build creates a version of this that a standalone financial buyer genuinely can't replicate. If you already own a platform company in the same sector as your add-on target, your outreach carries structural credibility from the first sentence. You're not a fund looking for an asset to hold for 5 years. You're an operating business that could become the strategic home for everything the founder spent 3 decades building, with real revenue synergies, a concrete cultural fit argument, and a visible future for his employees. That changes the conversation before it even starts. The firms capturing the best situations right now are working smaller lists with longer lead times, touching targets more often before making any direct ask, and being specific enough in their outreach that the owner feels seen rather than sorted. By the time those conversations happen, the owner has already decided this firm is different from the other 40 who reached out. The deal was never really competitive after that. The cost of getting this wrong, here's what makes this concrete. The LMM closed roughly 379 transactions in 2024. Not 379 good ones and thousands of mediocre ones sitting below them. Just 379. In a market that size, a broken sourcing model doesn't just mean you miss a few deals. It means you're competing for the wrong fraction of a small number, and every year that compounds into a gap that's genuinely hard to close. The add-on math runs the same direction, but hits harder. When platforms are absorbing bolt-ons through relationships built over 18 months before any formal process, the firms with the tightest networks aren't just winning their own deals. They're locking up your future targets before those targets ever surface. You might close a platform this year, pay a fair multiple, and spend the next 3 years watching the best adjacencies disappear into a competitor's roll-up. You didn't lose those add-ons in a competitive process. You lost them before you knew they existed, because the relationship that mattered was already in place. The reputation cost moves on the same timeline, and it's the one most people ignore because it's invisible until it suddenly isn't. The founder you reached out to this year doesn't vanish. He sits on the board of his regional trade association. He plays golf with 2 other owners in the same subsector who are 5 or 6 years behind him on the succession timeline. His former CFO now runs finance for a company that fits your next fund's thesis. These networks are tighter than any database suggests, and the opinion your firm made on first contact travels through them without you ever knowing it happened. That's the actual compounding problem. It's not just that you missed one deal, it's that the sourcing decisions you make right now are determining who calls you in 2028 and 2029. The founder you treated like a data point this year is the one whose accountant would have introduced you to 3 others if you'd shown up differently. Your real competition isn't other sponsors running the same broken outreach playbook. Most of them are losing the same deals you are, which is some comfort, but it's the wrong frame entirely. The actual competition is the 1 or 2 firms in each subsector who spent the last 18 months doing the quiet work, showing up at the conference, getting the CPA introduction, earning the first call. Those firms aren't running a better sequence. They left the sequence model behind. As financing conditions ease into 2026 and platform formation picks back up, competition for high-quality LMM assets intensifies. The firms that fix their sourcing logic now will have a structural head start when that window opens. The ones still debugging their automation will be competing for whatever's left. Conclusion. The difference between a full pipeline and a good pipeline is whether the market trusts you before you ask for anything. So here's what to do this week. Pull your last 90 days of outreach and sort every touch into 2 columns. First column, the message had specific research context about that target's actual situation. Second column, it was a thesis statement that could have gone to anyone on a filtered list. That ratio is your sourcing health score, and is probably telling you something uncomfortable right now. If you want a concrete framework for rebuilding around trust density instead of send volume, the next video breaks down exactly how top LMM sponsors structure their deal sourcing. Watch it before your competitors get there first.